The summons. The crystalline halls of the Viridian Conclave stretched endlessly in all directions, their translucent walls pulsing with the bioluminescent patterns of 1,000 civilizations. Ambassador Kira Vex stood alone in the antechamber, her hands steady despite the weight of what was to come. She had been summoned here, to the oldest deliberative body in known space, not as a guest but as a defendant. The message had arrived 3 cycles ago, transmitted across 700 light-years with the seal of High Arbiter Thessalonkor himself. Humanity was to answer for its aberrant expansion patterns and cultural contamination of lesser species. The charges were vague, the accusations ancient in their prejudice. Kira had read between the lines easily enough. The old powers feared what they didn't understand, and humanity was incomprehensible to them. She adjusted the simple gray suit she wore. No medals, no insignia, just the clothes of someone who had nothing to prove. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her green eyes reflected the shifting lights of the corridor with a calm that took years to cultivate. Before her diplomatic career, Kira had been a mediator in the Belt Wars, where she'd learned that the most powerful weapon wasn't a gun but a well-chosen word. The doors opened without sound, a breach in reality itself as the chamber beyond revealed its impossible geometry. The conclave hall existed in folded space, appearing small from outside but containing thousands of seats arranged in ascending rings that spiraled upward into infinity. Every seat was filled. Kira walked forward onto the speaker's platform, a disk of polished obsidian suspended in the center of the vast chamber. Around her, the assembled delegates watched with multifaceted eyes, sensory organs and perception fields she couldn't begin to categorize. She recognized some of them: the towering Vrelnath with their 6-limbed bodies encased in environmental suits, the floating Kixari who existed partially in subspace, the ancient Morthan who hadn't physically moved from their seats in 3 millennia. High Arbiter Thessalonkor presided from the uppermost tier, his form obscured by ritual veils that shimmered with temporal distortion. When he spoke, his voice emanated from everywhere and nowhere, translated instantly into a language that bypassed ears entirely and spoke directly to comprehension. Ambassador Vex of the Terran Confederacy, the words manifested in her mind like ice. You stand before the Viridian Conclave, convened in continuous session for 10,000 standard years. We gather under the protocols of preservation, which have maintained galactic peace since before your species discovered fire. Kira inclined her head respectfully. I am honored to address this august body, High Arbiter. You may not feel honored when you understand why you are here, Thessalon continued. In the 3 centuries since humanity joined the galactic community, your species has violated 17 preservation protocols, destabilized 4 carefully managed cultural development zones, and introduced chaos into regions that had achieved perfect equilibrium. A murmur rippled through the chamber. If such a thing could be called a murmur when it involved electromagnetic pulses, chemical signals and probability fluctuations. Kira waited. She had learned long ago that silence was often the best response. The conclave has deliberated, Thessalon said. We have concluded that humanity represents a threat to galactic stability. Your species will be confined to your home system. All colonies will be evacuated and placed under conclave protectorate. All contact with other species will be mediated through approved cultural liaisons. This is not punishment, it is preservation. The chamber fell silent. Thousands of years of precedent hung in the air. The conclave's word was law, its decisions final. No species had ever successfully challenged its authority. Kira felt the weight of 300 billion human lives pressing down on her shoulders. She thought of the colony on New Avalon, where her daughter was studying xenobiology. She thought of the trading posts on the fringe where humans and aliens had built something new together. She thought of all the messy, chaotic, beautiful complexity that humanity brought to the stars. With respect, High Arbiter, Kira said quietly, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber, I request the right to respond. A pause that stretched for heartbeats. The protocols allow for defense, Thessalon acknowledged. You may speak. The conclave will listen, though our decision is already rendered. Kira smiled, not a friendly smile, but the smile of someone who had been underestimated her entire life. Thank you, she said. Because I'm not here to defend humanity's actions. I'm here to put the conclave itself on trial. The chamber erupted in chaos. The accusation. The disturbance spread through the conclave hall like ripples on a pond, each species expressing shock in their own way. The Vrelnatha's environmental suits flared with warning colors. The Kixari phased partially out of visible reality. Even the ancient Morthan stirred in their seats for the first time in living memory. High Arbiter Thessalon's presence intensified, the temporal veils around him crackling with what might have been anger. You dare. I dare because someone must, Kira interrupted, her voice cutting through the chaos with a clarity that surprised even her. For 10,000 years, this conclave has operated under the assumption that it knows what's best for every species in the galaxy. But has anyone ever questioned whether that assumption is correct? Order. Thessalon's command resonated through the chamber like a physical force. Ambassador Vex, you overstepped the bounds of diplomatic immunity. The conclave's authority is absolute, granted by the founding covenant signed by the first 17 species who achieved faster-than-light travel. Kira nodded slowly. I've read the founding covenant. All 47 volumes. I've also read the preservation protocols, the cultural development guidelines, and the equilibrium maintenance directives. Do you know what I found most interesting? She didn't wait for an answer. Nowhere in any of those documents does it explain what you're preserving, or why equilibrium is inherently good. It simply assumes these things as self-evident truths. But they're not truths at all, they're choices. And choices can be wrong. Counselor Miraseth of the Kixari materialized more fully into real space, her translucent form coalescing into something almost solid. Her voice was like wind chimes in a storm. The ambassador speaks of things she cannot comprehend. We maintain equilibrium because chaos leads to suffering. We preserve cultures because change destroys the unique beauty of each species. We learned this through millennia of observation. Observation from a distance, Kira countered. Tell me, counselor, when was the last time you walked among the species you claim to protect? When did you last share a meal with them, laugh at their jokes, cry at their sorrows? Miraseth flickered uncertainly. We do not interfere. Interference would compromise our objectivity. No, Kira said softly. It would compromise your comfort. It's easy to make decisions about other people's lives when you never have to face the consequences. You've turned preservation into a religion and equilibrium into a prison. A new voice entered the discussion, deep and resonant like continents shifting. Counselor Dramic of the More Than spoke for the first time in 3 centuries. Young species often mistake stability for stagnation. We have seen civilizations rise and fall. We know the patterns. When we identified a species on the verge of cultural breakthrough, we protected them. When we saw a civilization trending toward self-destruction, we intervened. We saved countless lives. At what cost? Kira asked. The Pelthian people, do you remember them? 4,200 years ago they were developing quantum computing. Your agents decided this technology was premature for their developmental stage and suppressed it. The Pelthians now exist in a carefully managed Bronze Age technology level, preserved like insects in amber. They could have been exploring the stars by now. Instead, they're frozen in time, their potential locked away because you decided you knew better. They are happy, Thessalon interjected. We conducted extensive studies. The Pelthians have low rates of conflict, strong social cohesion and sustainable resource usage. They are a model of successful preservation. Kira pulled a data tablet from her pocket, an ancient human device, laughably primitive by conclave standards. I interviewed 17 Pelthian individuals over the past year. Do you want to know what they told me? They dream of things they can't name. They look at the stars and feel an ache they don't understand. They create art about flying, about touching the void, about becoming more than they are. You didn't preserve their happiness, Arbiter. You preserved their ignorance. The chamber grew quieter now, species who had never questioned the conclave's wisdom beginning to shift uncomfortably. And that's just one example, Kira continued, her voice gaining strength. The Zelthari were developing democratic institutions before you decided monarchy was more stable for their social structure. The Kinari were forming interplanetary alliances before you deemed them not ready for such complexity. You've spent 10,000 years playing God, and no one has ever asked whether you had the right. We had the obligation, Thessalon said coldly. We are the eldest, the wisest. Who else could bear this burden? Kira met his veiled gaze without flinching. That, she said, is exactly the problem. The evidence. High Arbiter Thessalon's temporal veils rippled with barely contained fury. You come before this ancient body with accusations based on sentiment and speculation. The conclave's decisions are grounded in 10 millennia of data, analysis and carefully considered judgment. Your emotional appeals change nothing. Kira smiled grimly. Then let's talk about data. She activated her tablet, and holographic projections materialized around her, filling the air with graphs, charts, and streams of information. The display was crude by conclave standards, No quantum entanglement arrays, no probability matrices, but its simplicity made it accessible. This is a comprehensive analysis of 63 species currently under conclave protection, Kira began. My team spent 2 years compiling this, interviewing thousands of individuals and analyzing cultural development patterns. What we found was disturbing. The first hologram expanded, a graph showing declining innovation rates across multiple civilizations. Every species under conclave management shows the same trend. In their first century of contact, innovation rates dropped by an average of 73%. By the second century they've fallen to nearly zero. Your preservation is actually cultural suffocation. Counselor Ivex of the Vrelnath rose to their full height, environmental suit humming. Their voice emerged as a synthesized baritone. This is natural regression to the mean. Species often experience bursts of development followed by periods of consolidation. We do not suppress innovation, we prevent reckless advancement that could lead to catastrophe. Really? Kira pulled up another display. Then explained the Dravani. Before conclave contact, they were developing faster than light communication. Your assessment deemed this technology potentially destabilizing to their social cohesion. You convinced their leadership to ban research in that field. That was 800 years ago. Do you know what happened? She didn't wait for an answer. The Dravani's most brilliant minds had nowhere to direct their talents. Scientific institutions withered. Within 3 generations, they'd lost the theoretical knowledge that had brought them to the cusp of breakthrough. They're now classified as a stabilized culture, content with sublight commerce and local governance. You didn't preserve them, you lobotomized them. The chamber stirred uneasily. Some delegates were accessing their own records, cross-referencing Kira's claims. Thessalon's voice cut through the murmurs. The Dravani were destroying their ecosystem with uncontrolled industrial expansion. Their FTL research was part of a resource extraction scheme that would have rendered their homeworld uninhabitable within 2 centuries. We saved them from themselves. Did you? Kira challenged. Or did you simply choose which future they were allowed to have? Yes, they faced challenges. Yes, they might have made mistakes. But they never got the chance to solve their own problems, to learn from their own failures, to evolve on their own terms. You took away their agency and called it mercy. She pulled up a new set of data, this one showing economic indicators. Let's talk about the conclave's resource management policies. Under the Equilibrium Maintenance Directives, younger species are allocated specific resource quotas designed to prevent disruptive growth. Sounds reasonable, right? Sustainable development. The hologram zoomed in on comparative data. Except the allocation formulas were designed 10,000 years ago, based on the development patterns of the first 17. They don't account for species with different metabolisms, different social structures, different environmental needs. The Koriaks, for instance, are a hive mind species that processes nutrients collectively. Your individual-based quotas left millions of them in a state of perpetual malnutrition for 6 generations before someone noticed. Counselor Miraseth phased partially out of real space, her form becoming indistinct. That was an unfortunate oversight, but it was corrected. After 6 generations of suffering, Kira pressed. And that's just one example. The Helkani, the Torvik, the Blessed Swarm of Koresh, all experienced similar oversights, because the conclave applies universal solutions to unique problems. You've created a system so rigid that it can't adapt, and you've convinced yourselves that this rigidity is wisdom. She paused, letting the data sink in. Around the chamber, delegates were conferring with their aides, accessing historical records, verifying claims. The certainty that had pervaded the conclave was beginning to crack. But here's the most damning evidence, Kira said quietly, pulling up one final display. In the past 10,000 years, how many new species have risen to join the conclave as full members? The hologram showed a simple number, 0. Not 1, Kira continued. The youngest member of this body achieved FTL travel 7,000 years ago. For 3,000 years, despite hundreds of species joining the galactic community, not a single one has been deemed worthy of joining the decision-making body that controls their fates. Why is that, High Arbiter? Are we all just too young? Too immature? Too chaotic? Thessalon's silence was answer enough. Or maybe, Kira suggested, the conclave likes things exactly as they are. The philosophy. The weight of Kira's accusation hung in the air like gravity before a star's collapse. For several long moments no one spoke. The conclave hall, which had witnessed 10,000 years of debate, had never experienced anything quite like this, a complete inversion of its fundamental assumptions. Finally, Counselor Dramic of the More Than stirred, his ancient voice carrying the weight of epics. Ambassador Vex, you misunderstand our purpose. We are not tyrants hoarding power. We are shepherds protecting a flock from wolves it cannot see. The galaxy is vast and dangerous. Young species, in their exuberance, rush toward innovations they cannot control. We have seen it countless times: antimatter weapons, singularity experiments, consciousness digitization gone wrong. Without our guidance, half the species in this chamber would have destroyed themselves within centuries of achieving spaceflight. Kira turned to face the ancient being. I don't doubt your good intentions, Counselor. I don't doubt that you've prevented catastrophes. But you've also prevented something else: the fundamental right of sapient beings to determine their own destiny, even if that destiny includes failure. She walked across the speaker's platform, her movements carrying the weight of conviction. Let me tell you about humanity's history. We nearly destroyed ourselves, not once but dozens of times. Nuclear weapons, climate collapse, genetic warfare, artificial intelligence run amok. We stood at the brink of extinction more times than I can count. The hologram shifted, showing images of Earth's turbulent history. Mushroom clouds over cities, oceans choked with plastic, automated weapons systems turning on their creators. We made terrible mistakes, Kira continued. We suffered. We died in numbers that would horrify you. But we also learned. Each catastrophe taught us something we couldn't have learned any other way. We developed ethical frameworks through painful trial and error. We created safeguards because we understood, viscerally, why they were necessary. No amount of outside instruction could have given us that wisdom. We had to earn it with blood and tears. Counselor Ivex's environmental suit pulsed with agitation. You were lucky. For every species like humanity that survives its adolescence, 10 others perish. Would you have us simply watch civilizations burn because learning from mistakes sounds noble? No, Kira said firmly. I would have you offer help without taking away choice. Share knowledge without imposing control. Be mentors, not masters. There's a difference between preventing genocide and deciding that a species isn't ready for quantum computing. She pulled up a new image, a human child learning to walk, falling, crying, then standing again. When a parent raises a child, they protect against genuinely lethal dangers. They don't let the child play with loaded guns or drink poison. But they also don't prevent every scraped knee, every bruised ego, every disappointment. Those small pains teach the child how to navigate the world. If you eliminate all risk, all challenge, all possibility of failure, you don't create a safe child, you create a dependent one. High Arbiter Thessalon finally spoke, his voice carrying millennia of certainty. Your analogy is flawed, Ambassador. Children grow into adults. Species do not fundamentally change. The More Than were ancient when humanity's ancestors lived in trees. We do not grow beyond our nature. Don't we? Kira challenged. Counselor Dramic, you've sat in that seat for 3,000 years. In that time, have you changed your mind about anything significant? Have you questioned your assumptions? Have you grown? The ancient being was silent. That's what happens when you achieve perfect equilibrium, Kira said softly. You stop growing. You stop questioning. You become so invested in the system you've created that you can't imagine anything different. You've turned wisdom into dogma and experience into prison bars. She gestured to the assembled delegates. Look around this chamber. How many truly independent civilizations exist in the galaxy? How many species are free to chart their own course, make their own mistakes, discover their own potential? You've created a galaxy of children, perpetually dependent on the Conclave's guidance, never trusted to make their own decisions. Counselor Miraseth coalesced more fully into real space, her translucent form shimmering with uncertainty. What would you have us do, Ambassador? Abandon our responsibilities? Allow chaos to reign? I would have you trust, Kira replied. Trust that sapient beings, given freedom and support rather than control, will find their own paths. Trust that diversity of thought and approach makes us stronger, not weaker. Trust that mistakes are how we grow, not signs that we need more supervision. She looked directly at Thessalon. And most importantly, I would have you recognize that 10,000 years of unchallenged authority has made you blind to your own limitations. You're not gods. You're just old. The chamber erupted again, but this time the chaos felt different, less like outrage and more like awakening. The turning point. The debate raged for hours. Delegates who had sat in comfortable silence for centuries suddenly found their voices, arguing among themselves in ways that would have been unthinkable before Kira's speech. The monolithic unity of the conclave was fracturing, and High Arbiter Thessalon watched it happen with something approaching horror. "This is precisely the chaos we exist to prevent," he declared, his voice resonating with power that shook the chamber. "Order. I demand order." But the delegates were no longer listening to him alone. A small voice, so small it shouldn't have carried across the vast chamber, somehow cut through the tumult. "I wish to speak." Everyone turned. The voice belonged to Envoy Lilith of the Pelthian people, representing the civilization Kira had mentioned earlier. The Pelthians were not members of the conclave, merely observers, allowed to witness proceedings but never to participate. Lilith was young by Pelthian standards, barely 40 solar cycles, with the bronze skin and crystalline eyes characteristic of her species. "You do not have speaking privileges," Thessalon stated flatly. "Then grant them," Kira interjected. "Or are you afraid of what she might say?" The challenge was impossible to ignore. Thessalon hesitated, then relented. "Speak, Envoy." Briefly. Lilith rose, her hands trembling slightly. "I was not supposed to be here. My predecessor, Envoy Morith, was scheduled to attend. But he took his own life 3 lunar cycles ago. He was the 17th Pelthian envoy to do so in the past century." A profound silence fell over the chamber. "We are told we are happy," Lilith continued, her voice gaining strength. "We are shown metrics that prove our contentment. But there is something the metrics do not capture. A hunger we cannot name, a grief for something we have never known. Our poets write of it. Our artists paint it. We feel it in our dreams." She looked at Kira, then at the assembled conclave. "The ambassador spoke of our potential locked away. We know this even if we lack words for it. We know that we are less than we could be. And that knowledge is a wound that never heals." Tears crystallized on her cheeks, literal crystals, the way Pelthians expressed deep emotion. Envoy Morith left a note. It said, "I have seen the stars my whole life, but I will never touch them. I cannot live knowing my children will be born into the same beautiful prison." 17 envoys, all with similar notes. How many more must die before the conclave acknowledges our suffering? Counselor Dramic shifted uncomfortably. "We were not aware." "Because you never asked," Lilith said simply. "You measured our happiness by your metrics, not our own. You preserved our culture without understanding that culture is not meant to be frozen. It is meant to grow, to change, to become." Other voices began to emerge from the observer sections, species that had never been allowed to speak in the conclave before. The Dravani representatives stood, then the Zelthari, then the Kanari. One by one they shared stories of suppressed dreams, of innovations denied, of futures stolen by well-meaning preservation. Kira watched as the testimonies piled up, each one a hammer blow against the conclave's certainty. She had hoped to spark doubt, but this was something more. A revolution of consciousness, a complete re-evaluation of assumptions that had gone unchallenged for millennia. High Arbiter Thessalon's temporal veils flickered erratically, a sign of profound disturbance. "This is, we never intended, our purpose was always to protect." "I know," Kira said gently, surprising herself with the compassion in her voice. "You genuinely believed you were doing the right thing. But intention doesn't erase harm. And it doesn't excuse refusing to change when confronted with evidence of that harm." Counselor Miraseth phased almost entirely out of real space, her voice distant and uncertain. "If what you say is true, if our preservation has caused such suffering, what would you have us do? How can we correct 10,000 years of mistakes?" It was the question Kira had been waiting for, the moment when defense turned to dialogue. "First," she said, "acknowledge the harm. Not just to me but to every species you've protected. Second, dismantle the systems that enforce dependency. Give younger species genuine autonomy, not managed independence. Third, transform this conclave from a ruling body into a true council, one where all sapient species have voice and vote, where decisions are made collaboratively, not dictated from above." "And humanity?" Thessalon asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What of the charges against your species?" Kira smiled. "Judge us by the same standards you apply to yourselves. We're chaotic, yes. We make mistakes, absolutely. But we're also free. And we're willing to extend that freedom to everyone, even when it's messy and difficult and uncertain." She paused. "Especially then." The decision. The conclave hall fell into a contemplative silence that stretched for what felt like hours. Delegates who had operated under absolute certainty for millennia now found themselves in unfamiliar territory, genuine doubt, coupled with the possibility of profound change. High Arbiter Thessalon Kur descended from his elevated position, his temporal veils parting for the first time in living memory. Beneath them was a being of pure energy, ancient beyond comprehension, with eyes that had witnessed the birth of civilizations. He materialized on the speaker's platform beside Kira, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. Youth and age, chaos and order, change and tradition. "Do you know why I agreed to let you speak today?" Thessalon asked quietly, his voice now stripped of its ceremonial resonance, sounding almost vulnerable. Kira shook her head. "Because I am tired," he admitted. 10,000 years is a long time to carry the burden of certainty. To make decisions that affect billions of lives. To never doubt, never question, never rest. When your request arrived, I felt something I had not experienced in millennia. Curiosity. What would this young species say? What perspective could they possibly offer that we had not already considered? He gestured to the vast chamber around them. We built this system with the best of intentions. We had seen so much death, so much needless suffering. We thought if we could just establish order, maintain stability, prevent the catastrophes we had witnessed, we could create a galaxy at peace. And we did create peace, but at what cost? Counselor Dramic descended as well, his massive form settling beside them. I remember the shattering wars, Ambassador Vex. Entire civilizations consumed by weapons they did not understand. The Keltheran genocide, where a species exterminated itself in a matter of hours through poorly controlled nanoplague. The Screaming Dark, when a singularity experiment consumed 17 star systems. These are not abstractions to us, they are memories that haunt us still. I don't diminish those tragedies, Kira said softly. They're horrifying. But you responded to chaos by eliminating the possibility of growth. You treated the symptom, catastrophic failure, while ignoring the underlying condition, the need for sapient beings to chart their own course. Counselor Ivex joined them on the platform, their environmental suits' colors shifting to calmer hues. On my homeworld we have a saying, the gardener who fears winter will never see spring. We Vrelnath understand cycles, growth through seasons, death and renewal. Perhaps we forgot this wisdom when we joined the conclave. Perhaps we became too focused on preservation to remember that life requires risk. One by one, other counselors descended to the speaker's platform, abandoning their elevated positions. It was unprecedented, the entire conclave gathering as equals rather than hierarchy. Miraseth coalesced into her most solid form, standing among them. Representatives from observer species joined as well, creating a circle of sapient beings from across the galaxy. I propose we put it to a vote, Miraseth said. Not just among the conclave members but among all species present. Let every sapient voice be heard, as Ambassador Vex suggested. The question before us is simple. Do we continue as we have or do we dare to change? That's not the right question, Lilith interjected, her crystalline eyes gleaming. The question is, are we brave enough to trust each other? To build something new together, rather than maintaining what we've always known. Thessalon looked around the circle, seeing faces, or their equivalents, from hundreds of worlds. Species that had been silenced finding their voices. Civilizations that had been managed discovering agency. It was messy, chaotic, and utterly unpredictable. It was, he realized, alive in a way the conclave had not been for millennia. Very well, he said, his voice carrying across the chamber without artificial amplification. Let us vote. Not on whether to punish humanity, but on something far more significant. Do we dissolve the current structure of the Viridian Conclave and reform as a true collaborative body, where all species have equal voice and vote? Where decisions are made through dialogue rather than decree? Where we guide but do not control, offer wisdom but not compulsion? The vote was conducted through each species' preferred method. Electromagnetic pulses, chemical signals, verbal affirmations, probability collapses, and a dozen other means of expression. Kira watched as the results compiled, displayed in a format comprehensible to all. When the tally was complete, the chamber fell silent. 73% in favor of reformation. The conclave, as it had existed for 10,000 years, would cease to be. Thessalon turned to Kira. It seems, Ambassador, that you have not merely shattered our traditions. You have given us permission to imagine something better. We did this together, Kira replied. That's the point. No one species has all the answers, but together we might find them. The new beginning. 3 cycles later, Kira stood once again in the conclave hall, but everything had changed. The rigid hierarchical seating was gone, replaced by a more organic arrangement where delegates could move freely, gather in discussion groups, or address the assembly from any position. The speaker's platform had been expanded to accommodate multiple voices simultaneously. The first session of the Galactic Collaborative Council was about to begin. Kira watched as delegates filed in, not just the old conclave members but representatives from every sapient species in known space. The Pelthians arrived with Lilith leading a delegation of 12. The Dravani sent their brightest scientists, finally free to resume their research. Even species that had barely begun space exploration were given seats and voices. The transformation hadn't been easy. Thessalon had stepped down as High Arbiter, declaring the position itself obsolete. In his place, a rotating council of 7 members from different species would share administrative duties, changing every solar cycle. Dramek had initially resisted but eventually embraced the change, admitting that he'd grown comfortable in his ancient certainty. Miraseth had become one of the strongest advocates for reform, using her influence among the Kiksari to push for rapid implementation of new protocols. Ivex had volunteered to lead a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, documenting the harms caused by the old system and working with affected species to provide restitution. But the most profound changes were happening at the grassroots level. The Pelthians had been given access to the suppressed quantum computing research. Within one cycle, they'd advanced it beyond what the Conclave had imagined possible, developing applications in medicine and environmental restoration that were already saving lives. The Dravani were teaching FTL communication theory to anyone who wanted to learn. The Zelthari were experimenting with hybrid governance models that blended monarchy with democratic principles. It was chaotic. It was messy. It was glorious. Thessalon approached Kira, his energy form now habitually unshielded, no longer hiding behind veils of authority. "I owe you an apology, Ambassador. And more than that, gratitude." "You don't owe me anything," Kira said. "You did the hard part. You admitted you were wrong and chose to change. That takes more courage than I showed in just giving a speech." "Your speech gave us permission to doubt," Thessalon replied. "Do you know how precious that is? We had become so invested in our own infallibility that we couldn't see our failures. You shattered that illusion." He gestured to the filling chamber. "Look at them. In 3 cycles, they've proposed initiatives that would have taken us centuries to even consider. The Energy Sharing Coalition, the Cultural Exchange Program, the Mutual Defense Pact, all of it born from cooperation rather than control. There will be problems," Kira cautioned. "Mistakes will happen. Some species will misuse their new freedom. There will be conflicts that the old conclave would have prevented." "I know," Thessalon said. "And we will face them together as equals. Perhaps we will fail. But at least it will be our failure, owned by all of us rather than imposed from above." The session began with a moment of silence for all the beings who had suffered under the old system. Those who had died without knowing their potential, those who had lived in beautiful prisons, those who had been denied the fundamental right to self-determination. It was a solemn acknowledgement that good intentions did not excuse harm. Then the work began. The first proposal came from an unlikely source. A young Moor named Kelvin who argued for a galactic knowledge commons where all species could freely share and access information. The old Dramek would have dismissed this as recklessly destabilizing. The new Dramek supported it enthusiastically, adding refinements from his own ancient wisdom. Kira watched the debates unfold, sometimes heated, always passionate, occasionally brilliant, frequently messy. This was what democracy looked like on a galactic scale. It wasn't efficient. It wasn't orderly. But it was alive with possibility. A message arrived on her tablet from her daughter on New Avalon. "Mom, you're not going to believe this. The Pelthian students just arrived to collaborate on our xenobiology research. They have insights we never imagined. This is going to change everything." Kira smiled. Change everything. That was the point. As the session continued, she noticed Lilith speaking passionately about expanding educational exchanges, her crystalline eyes bright with hope rather than tears. She saw former observer species proposing bold initiatives, no longer afraid to dream. She saw the old guard learning to listen as much as they spoke. The Viridian Conclave had maintained peace for 10,000 years through control and preservation. The Galactic Collaborative Council would pursue peace through trust and growth. Which approach would ultimately prove better remained to be seen. But for the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy had a choice. And that, Kira thought, made all the difference.